Well, I started out many eons ago, about 500 years ago, just kidding, as a journalist, and was a believer in the scientific method, still am. Was pretty much an atheist and a person who thought that everything was going to come out fine, science was going to solve all our problems, and that if people just took an active role in the world, that we would solve all our world's problems. And eventually I came up against I bought a book which I thought was about architecture, called Mystery of the Cathedrals, written by an enigmatic, anonymous guy named Fulcanelli. And I read it, and instead of a book on the architecture of medieval cathedrals, I found I was reading a book about a strange subject called alchemy, of which I thought was created by mad people in their basements working with mercury vapors. And instead, what I found was an incredibly intelligent, erudite study of an ancient kind of culture or science. And that initiated me into a whole world. That was 25 years ago. My first religious experience that I had in my life was in 1968 when I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey when I was 15 years old. I couldn't get out of my seat. I was completely stunned that a movie could actually try to accomplish what 2001: A Space Odyssey accomplished. And it was actually, ever since then, all I wanted to do was really make films. And have been making films ever since I saw 2001. So I've always had an intimate relationship with the films of Stanley Kubrick. But what got me really going was in the early 1990s, I was working with an American researcher named Richard Hoagland on lunar research and what NASA was up to during the Apollo missions, and spent a lot of time going to NASA labs and looking at photographs of the Apollo missions and hundreds of thousands of photographs. Really became obsessed with everything lunar, I guess you could say, and read everything about the moon that I could, and just was interested in it. And that got me somehow back to the movie 2001 because of the lunar sequences in 2001. And because I'd spent so long looking at the Apollo footage, I was very familiar with it. And after a long hiatus of not seeing 2001, and it finally came out on DVD in 2001, actually, the year 2001, I bought it. I put it on my television and began watching it, and within 10 minutes I had cracked the entire Apollo image problems, because the first 20 minutes of 2001 are the ape scenes, which take place supposedly 4 million years ago on Earth. And I could see that the technique that Stanley used to film the ape scenes was exactly the same technique that someone had used to film the Apollo footage. Then I realized that 2001: A Space Odyssey and the Apollo program ran parallel, concurrent with each other, and that Fred Ordway, who was the top NASA advisor for the Apollo missions, was also the top science advisor for Stanley Kubrick in 2001. And then I found the credits. I remembered the original credits. And I was surprised when I watched the DVD in 2001 that the credits that I remember weren't on the film. And so I found a book which had the original credits from the original release of 2001. And in the credits, the original credits, all of the people, all of the corporations that helped NASA get to the moon, quote unquote, were involved in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Exactly. All the same. The RAND Corporation, all the aerospace corporations, IBM, everybody exactly paralleled with the same contracts that NASA had. I also began having a correspondence with Jim Garrison, who was investigated the JFK murders and very famously portrayed by Kevin Costner in the film JFK by Oliver Stone. This is before Oliver Stone's film came out. And he got me onto the case that many of the people that were involved with Lee Harvey Oswald, who knew Lee Harvey Oswald at the Riley Coffee Company in New Orleans, had quit the Riley Coffee Company, all of them, and had all gone to work at NASA in Houston. So now I had a link between the JFK assassination and NASA, and then I began to backtrack the German scientists who've been brought into NASA through Operation Paperclip, and I realized that one of the chief facilitators for these scientists coming into the United States, the person who spoke for them, was the co-writer of 2001: Space Odyssey, Arthur C. Clarke. So I have a smoking gun, which is the front screen projection evidence. That is my smoking gun. I've got it nailed. I have Hollywood technicians who have looked at my work and say I'm absolutely right. People who work with front screen projection say that I am absolutely right, that the NASA stuff is front screen projection, and that Stanley Kubrick was the guy who perfected the front screen projection process. And so I came finally to the conclusion that the film 2001: A Space Odyssey was a research and development project designed not only to make a great movie, but secretly to help create the vast lunar landscapes that would be needed to be created on a set here, not here in the United States, but here on Earth. It was actually shot in London at Boreham Wood Studios. Kubrick spent from 1964 till late 1966 shooting the front screen projection sequences for 2001, and yet there were only about 10 minutes or 20 minutes of the whole film. Yet he spent over 2.5 years of the production time shooting those sequences. And so, no, I do not have the smoking gun for Kubrick doing it. I do have the smoking gun for the front screen projection, but I have enough circumstantial evidence to convict Kubrick of doing the deed. And I believe he left behind the traces of his involvement in his film The Shining. Barry Lyndon, which is his period piece that he did, portraying what life was like in the 1840s and earlier, was shot with a lens that was given to him. 2 lenses were given to him by NASA, and these were special satellite lenses which had super wide f-stops, so the apertures were wide open, and these are really expensive lenses which cost possibly millions of dollars to develop, and NASA just gives it to him. And there's even an interview, a curious interview that Christiana Kubrick does with a French film crew shot soon after Stanley died, in which she says that NASA gave Stanley the lenses, and there was even more. She intimates dealings with him, and her smile during this interview is sort of like the Mona Lisa smile. It's very like, I know something and I can't tell you. So it's very, very interesting interview. The interview itself is part of a CIA PSYOPs program designed to squash what I'm bringing out, however. And I believe that Christiana Kubrick did find out what was going on and was, I don't know if she was upset or not. There's curious relationships between Stanley Kubrick and Christiana Kubrick's family, the Harlans, who are a very upper class German family, and Christiana Harlan's uncle was actually a filmmaker for Hitler. We know that Stanley was obsessed with everything Nazi, everything. He collected Nazi memorabilia, Nazi writings, Nazi scientific work, and I believe that Stanley, through his relationship with Arthur C. Clarke, who was rubbing shoulders with some very, very smart guys, I think there were some very interesting late-night conversations in Arthur C. Clarke's apartment in London about 1963, 1964, in which a very young and precocious Stanley Kubrick came to find out that there was a parallel space program, and that they knew a lot more about the solar system than they were telling us. The power elite, possibly in order to make themselves feel better about what they're doing, they feel that they have to tell us what's going on. Now, how they tell us what's going on, that's up to them. Secret societies are holding on to a lot of information, but they're holding on to one really important piece of information, which is a solar cycle of some sort, of which the sun goes through a cycle, and that every few thousand years it flips, sort of. It electromagnetically flips. And this causes tremendous cataclysms here on Earth. And this secret society, the main thing that they were doing is keeping a hold of this information and passing it on successfully from generation to generation. All of the political, the corruption, the government control, the monarchies, all of that is a result of this original intention, which is to hold this knowledge and to keep it and to pass it on. They have successfully passed it on. The Denver Airport, the Georgia Guidestones, the Cross of Henday, and Stanley Kubrick's films are all about this. So they're giving us the information and they're telling us what they're doing, but they're not telling us in language or using symbol, because that's the language they speak in. So Stanley Kubrick designed 2001 to reveal several layers, like three-dimensional chess, because he was a chess master. Don't forget, Stanley Kubrick could have been the next Boris Spassky or Bobby Fischer. He was a top-notch chess player. Everybody in New York was afraid to play chess against him. He could play 3 different games at once against 3 top players at once. And he supported himself in the early 50s with chess playing. And so he's playing a game of 3-dimensional chess. He's got a 200 IQ. He's bored with filmmaking. He's got unlimited funds. What would you do? And so he did what anybody with an conscious mind would do. He began telling us the secret information that he had begun to get privy to via his associations with a secret society, a Saturnian society, if you will, that comes out of Germany. And the Harlans, Christiana Kubrick's family is involved in it. Arthur C. Clarke is definitely involved in it. Werner von Braun, Hermann Oberth, this is why they called the rocket that went to the moon, supposedly went to the moon, the Saturn V. This is why they put all their eggs into a basket into Cassini and blasted it off to Saturn, where it's been going around Saturn year after year doing all sorts of secret work. They have a relationship with Saturn. And this all comes back to Kubrick, because the original planet from which the monolith was to be discovered in the movie 2001 was to be the same as it is in the book 2001, and that was Saturn. I believe that somebody higher up pulled the plug after they read the book 2001, pulled the plug on Stanley and said, no, you're not making it Saturn. What makes this whole thing really, really interesting is that the monolith in the book 2001 Space Odyssey was discovered by Bowman, the astronaut, on the moon of Saturn called Iapetus. Why did Clarke choose Iapetus? Why did Kubrick choose Iapetus? Those are great questions.